Hello, this is Patrick W. Crawford, Moo-Ack Productions, and this is the behind the scenes for the animation of GameChap's Mind It Out music video parody. In this video, I will be going through the different challenges I encountered while creating this animation. If you want to hear more about my workflow, I have done more extensive walkthroughs for previous animations, so click on the screen at left to see any of those. So the first step in this process for creating the animation was to put together my asset files. While I had done a couple of Minecraft videos beforehand, I needed to completely redo a lot of things for this music video. So here you see my blocks asset files. This is the blend file that has all of my props and individual blocks that I use to create the sets later on. So immediately I have all the materials set up, such as what emits light, what doesn't, and so forth, so that when I go to create the sets, all I have to do is link blocks or elements from this file into the other file, which makes things much more convenient later on. In a similar way, I have all of my mobs or character rigs set up here. You can see I have two sets of each mob. The bottom one is the fully rigged version, which I actually use for animation. And the top one is what I call a dummy. This is for when I'm setting up the camera in a scene. I use this dummy, which is a undeformed rig, or it's not a rig at all, it's just another placeholder object, so I can kind of plan where I expect the character to be and set up the cameras without actually having to animate it first. This made going through different scenes a lot quicker, so I could kind of get the idea of how the camera flows before actually having to worry about where the animation is. So after this, I start to do the planning for each of the scenes in the animation. The way I generally do this is I either draw on a piece of paper or use a grease pencil in Blender to block out where I want each part of the set to be. This includes where the major geometry of the set exists, where I want the motion to be centered around, where I guess that the character is going to be moving in and out of, and basically getting a sense of where the motion is going to happen so that I can form the set around this to be not obstructive, but actually complement the animation that I'll do later on. One thing I used to help streamline the process of creating the sets was to use Blender's groups. This is a way of grouping different objects or items together so that they can be instanced in the Blender scene. So for example, here I have a torch, which consists of this small cube here, which is the main shaft, the flame here, and then there's the light object, which actually emits light. What I've done is I've made all that part of one group so that I can just go into here and add an instance of the torch. The really nice thing about this is I've already pre-animated the movement of the flame so that when I add another torch, it already has that animation there. Or if I later on want to change the animation or change how this one object looked, it's updated throughout the scene where I've used these group instances. In the same way, you see I have groups for different trees as well. It's a huge memory saver as well because you don't have the actual geometry for each one as a separate entity. It's linking all of these trees or different objects together, which makes the 3D scene move much quicker and makes it a lot easier to create scenes. So here we have opened the starting scene of the animation with the house and the outside of the cave. What I tend to do when I'm setting up the blocks for the set is I have all the character and crowd rigs and interactable devices on the first layer. On a second layer I have the very basic geometry of the set. And on a third layer I have the higher detailed items that make the animation look nicer but in general slow down the viewport. So this third layer I tend to not have active while I'm animating. At that point, I start to set up cameras throughout my scene. What I usually do is begin with a fly-through of the set. This basically will have one camera that goes at all the key positions that I expect that I will probably use in the future. I'm still working out the spacing of the scene, and as I'm positioning this sort of demo camera, I'm deciding, oh, maybe I should change the set to look more like this. So it's a way to see what the scene will look like before I actually commit to putting proper cameras. So what I have set up here is the video sequence editor in Blender. This is a place to place strips or parts of your animation scene into a linear editor where you can select which cameras are active at different points in time, slide the animation with respect to the entire scene back and forth a little bit to basically get your overall timing for the animation. And about this is I can play this back in pretty close to real time, which is better than the viewport where I have the actual rigs going on, and I get a sense of the motion that's going on with my animation. And of course I can also have sound playing in another track, and so I can see the timing as I'm going along with respects to beat changes and so forth. So with this established workflow, I then go on to animate the rest of my scene with relative ease. At this point in the commentary, I'll start going through the actual final animation and point out different challenges and quirks that I encountered while doing this project. So right off the bat, you'll notice in a couple seconds that the flare and one of the torches flickers off a little bit too soon. That was an artifact that I rendered the flare separately from the rest of the file, and I had mistimed the animations of that starting bit. When I had fixed it, I forgot to fix the flare of the torch as well, so it's a little bit off from the rest of the animation. So here we now get a look at my first ever fight scene. Well, rather it's my fourth one, since I'd completely redone the original pass of this. It just looks so horrible. You have to be able to go back to your animation and say, no, this is crap, and completely redo it. Sometimes it's frustrating. There you notice the zombie got hit in the soft spot. I didn't notice that until someone commented on YouTube, but in general, the fight scenes were completely unchoreographed. I kind of just played it by ear, thinking that, okay, if you move from this position to this position, his body center is here, that lends the foot to landing there, which would link to this particular swinging motion, and the scene would just kind of unfold in that sort of natural way. Here with the explosion, it was a little bit larger than I intended. Sometimes it's just hard to meddle around with the settings for fire and smoke simulation to get it just right, and this was a 2-week turnaround project. That's right, the whole thing was done in 2 weeks, which is ridiculous, so some things I just had to kind of accept as I got out. So here we get the effect of changing from daytime to nighttime. I actually quite like the way it looked in the transition. I just keyframed different colors and the position of the sun and orientation. The nice look of this is due to the atmosphere effect in Blender. It's a setting on the sun that gives it a misty effect in the background. It really helps to light up the scene, and otherwise the shadows just fall into complete darkness. So it's also worth noting that the torches were placed in very key positions to properly light the area, but in some cases that was still not enough to make it look quite right. In the case where the mobs were in the shadows, they're still way too dark, so I had to add extra fill lamps to fill up those shadows. But in general, the scene was mostly just lit by a single sun lamp and then a very faint hemi, which lit up the entire scene just a little bit. So here we get the second fight scene. As you can kind of tell, it's kind of slow and a little bit awkward. Definitely that's one of the most comments I saw on YouTube. I find that actually a really great opportunity for me to kind of see this large influx of comments that I wouldn't otherwise get on my channel. Just sort of raw feedback to get a sense this is what people's gut feelings are about the animation. Something's a bit blocky, something's not smooth. So that's great to get that sort of feedback that I otherwise wouldn't get the chance to, and it's definitely something that I'll have to work on in the future. So this part coming up is actually one of the hardest parts of the animation for me, since I barely know how to dance in real life. But I actually looked at a couple reference videos for funky dance moves to kind of get a fluid motion. It's always good to look at other references or take a look for yourself. There you just saw my 5-minute last-minute attempt at making a Gundam style spider jockey. I noticed one person was able to catch that. It was very quickly and horribly done, but oh well. And here we have the final creeper explosion. You kind of see the scale of it was a little bit over the top. It's partly for stylistic effects, but it's also partly just because it was the easiest way to set it up. And again, I didn't have time to go into great detail and making everything look exactly like I wanted. You have to accept things kind of as they are sometimes. You'll notice there were about 50 frames in that final credit scene where shadows kind of disappear for a moment. I don't know why that was happening. I took like 2 hours trying to fix it before the final export. I wasn't able to fix it in the end, and again, some things you just have to accept and move on, otherwise you'll spend forever picking at those small details. So that about does it for this behind the scenes. I hope you enjoyed it. For you animators out there, I think it's always beneficial to see what other workflows work for other people to kind of find your own ideal system. Of course, if you have any questions or comments, I'll do my best to respond or point you in the right direction of a good answer. Having completed this project, I've really grown as an animator. For me, it was actually quite a big risk to take on this gig, but you can never gain anything without taking risks like that. I certainly hope to do more animations in the future to improve my skills and to just make awesome shorts. Thank you all for your support, and until next time, Moo-Ack.